Hi, welcome to Wow Express.
A newspaper writer is sent to the Bermuda Triangle to do a story on this enigmatic place. However, a bizarre little adventure awaits him. Today we will recap the story of the movie, Gulliver's Travels, from 2010. Gulliver works as a mail carrier for a newspaper in New York City. In another week of work, the clumsy employee will need to do some interviews to hire a new helper to help him with the company's tasks. Gulliver finally hires his new helper. His name is Dan, and on the same day the head delivery man shows the new employee all the duties he should perform, also warning him that they are only delivery men and should not draw any attention to themselves. However, Dan ends up disobeying his superior's orders. The auxiliary talks directly to the head of the company and even to Darcy, the newspaper editor with whom Gulliver has always been in love. On the same day, Dan, showing effort and cooperation with all the employees, gets a promotion and becomes the head of mail. Gulliver is saddened by the news. After all, Dan has managed to develop extraordinarily well in the company to the point of surpassing him in just one day. Towards the end of his workday, Gulliver realizes that he must change his ways or he will never achieve anything by being a complete slacker. He sees from a distance that his coworker Darcy is still in the office, and he takes the opportunity to talk to her about his feelings. When he comes face to face with the editor of the newspaper, the delivery misfit does not take any action. All he does to disguise that awkward situation is to take an application form to apply for the position of traveling writer. Darcy is impressed as she did not know that her coworker wrote and even on travel. The woman looks forward to receiving some of Gulliver's travel articles the next day. In order to impress her, Gulliver simply confirms that he will bring an article written by himself from a trip he made to Mexico some time ago. At home, the misfit delivery man realizes that he has gotten himself into a serious problem because he has never traveled and even less knows how to write an article on this subject. So Gulliver ends up having the brilliant idea of copying articles from other journalistic sites and pasting them into his article. The next day, Darcy is impressed by her co-worker's article. She says the travel writer position is his and his first job will be to do a story on the Bermuda Triangle. The woman says that this work would be done by herself, but due to her seasickness problem, she would end up not being able to produce good content. Gulliver ends up not contesting and immediately goes on his expedition. On the way to this new journey, a guide tells the protagonist that the horrifying stories about the Bermuda Triangle are all misleading, this being a way to get more tourists to visit the mysterious place. The new traveling writer begins to find the whole trip completely boring. He was on the high seas and apparently there was nothing much to report, so Gulliver sleeps reading one of his magazines, but sometime later he wakes up in the middle of a thunderstorm. The navigation service on his boat was no longer responding and his cell phone was not receiving any kind of satellite signal. He tries to equip himself with some buoys, but the boat is blown sky high by the colossal force of a water storm that has erupted on the scene. After the terror of the storm, Gulliver wakes up on a small beach, realizing that he has survived such a devastating phenomenon of nature. The traveling writer is surprised by several human beings around him, but they were all tiny compared to him. Gulliver believes that it is all a dream. He gets up and destroys all the restraints that the little people have made around him. In an attempt to immobilize the giant again, a group of men throw several hooks and manage to bring the creature down, who quickly faints from the fall. Upon regaining consciousness, Gulliver realizes that he is being carried by the little men. As he passes through the town, everyone is impressed by the size of that captured giant. The army general Edward presents the gigantic creature to his King Theodore, the ruler who commands the entire kingdom of Lilliput. Gulliver, still not understanding what was happening, is sent to a prison where he meets Horatio, a man who ended up being arrested just for looking at King Theodore's daughter. Before the giant arrives, Horatio reveals that he was the tallest man in Lilliput. The two prisoners eventually form a friendship due to their indifference. However, it is not long before General Edward begins to use Gulliver as a forced labor machine for the kingdom's activities. Edward installs a control mechanism in the huge giant, and through this, the army leader is able to move the beast's body completely by means of levers. At that moment, the Blefishans, who are the greatest enemies of the kingdom of Lilliput, begin an operation to attack the rival kingdom. They infiltrate the city and set fire to a region, all of which is only a distraction to capture Princess Mary. Edward and the two prisoners hear the fire signal and understand that the kingdom is under enemy attack. The general immediately orders the giant to drop everything he was doing and take him to the royal palace. After all, the princess could be in danger. Gulliver promptly obeys, and upon arriving on the scene, he receives orders from Edward that he is not to interfere with the rescue of Princess Mary. Horatio, on the other hand, asks his colleague to help protect the princess from enemy hands. The giant helps his friend and without much effort manages to save the king's daughter from the Blefishan attack. On the other hand, King Theodore is trapped and surrounded by the fire. Gulliver goes to the scene and tries to help him, but even with his enormous size the flames still burn him, so the boy has the idea to relieve himself to put out the fire, and incredibly his absurd idea works. The king is saved and everyone is surprised by the prisoner's bizarre attitudes. Edward says that this act of disrespect against the king will be enough for the giant to be eliminated. But Theodore is grateful for Gulliver's help, and from that day on, his relationship with the little ones began to change. The next day, the giant creature is invited to attend a royal dinner, but the giant says he will only attend the event if Horatio is invited as well. The king eventually gives in and allows both of them to attend the event. The two prisoners attend a royal dinner with all the nobility, on which occasion Gulliver is questioned about where he came from and if he is the king of his empire. The giant on the other hand ends up twisting the story and claims that he is the president of the place where he lives and that he is the one who commands everything there. Everyone is impressed by the power the beast possesses, even imagining that the giant's empire is the most powerful and strongest in the entire world. But Gulliver says he needs to return to his homeland immediately, and to do so, he needs to find his boat. King Theodore says he will send his men in search of the boat, and if they don't find it, they will build a means of transportation themselves to take it to his home. As the days passed, Gulliver eventually moved into a gigantic mansion built by the people of Lilliput. After all, everyone in that kingdom has incredible building skills. The giant even has a media room where he tells his story to all the little ones through a theater. However, the traveling writer poses as a main character in several existing movies, claiming that he has experienced all those amazing journeys. The traveler ends up putting himself in the leading roles of feature films such as Star Wars and Titanic, claiming for all the people of Lilliput that he eventually died in the sinking of the great ship, but came back to life a few days later. As time goes on, Gulliver even helps his friend Horatio win Princess Mary's love by giving him some tips and even reciting a love song. However, the princess is still under the control of General Edward. As evening falls, Gulliver receives news that the Imperial Army has finally found his boat, but it was in very poor condition, urgently needing a refit to repair the damage caused by the storm. In that same place, the giant finds his cell phone that was not yet fully uncharged. He realizes that he has received some voicemails, and when he opens his mailbox he comes across some messages from Darcy. The company editor discovers that he copied the article from another newspaper. She is furious for having been deceived, but at the same time disappointed with her co-worker's attitude. She says she never wants to see him again, and now she herself will be responsible for writing the article about the Bermuda Triangle. That night, Gulliver talks to Princess Mary and seriously thinks about not going back to his homeland. After all, in that kingdom he is respected and admired by everyone around him, and if he doesn't get Darcy's forgiveness, it would no longer make sense to go home, since she was the reason and inspiration to start the journey. The next day, General Edward tells his king that the giant should leave the kingdom as soon as possible, because his presence in that place would be a nuisance to the entire population. However, Theodore contests him and states that Gulliver has only brought benefits to the kingdom since his arrival. The king, realizing the perversity in the war captain's lines, appoints the giant as the new army general, demoting Edward to the position of vice commander. So, as an act of rebellion and revenge for what had happened, the former general sneakily deactivates all the kingdom's means of defense, leaving the enemy troops free to carry out an attack at any time. All sentry towers, cannons, and projectile launchers are immediately hidden on the seabed. Gulliver is now called upon to protect Lilliput again from the enemy attack. The giant enters the water and slowly approaches the enemy ships. He tells the Blefishans that they don't need to engage in mortal combat and that they could avoid any kind of confrontation if they would just leave. The giant then begins to pretend that it is fighting its enemies, but the opponents do not agree to simply run away. The ships take position and fire several cannonballs in the giant creature's direction. Conversely, the shots, upon coming into contact with Gulliver's body, are sent back to the ships, causing a wave of chaos and destruction over the Blefishans, as Lilliput celebrates their great victory over their rivals. Gulliver feels that he is the strongest being in the whole place and lets the power go to his head. Through that colossal combat, the giant took all the enemy ships to the Allied lands, in order to make the Blefishans prisoners in those lands. Days go by and the whole kingdom begins to live in an era of peace and tranquility, not caring about wars or confrontations. The buildings also gradually evolve with the giant writer's ideals. On one such day, while having fun with his friend Horatio, Gulliver advises him to talk to Princess Mary, as she is somehow being forced to love Vice Commander Edward. The giant completes, warning that if Horatio doesn't take some action, he will fall into the haunting friendship zone. The former prisoner now has in mind the important mission of conquering the princess of the kingdom. Meanwhile, Edward, who has found himself betrayed by his own people, goes to meet the king of the Blefishans and explains to him that he wishes to become their ally in order to extinguish the gigantic creature at once. The evil plan for the giant's downfall is to build a machine so powerful and gigantic that not even Gulliver's strength will be enough to defeat it. In Lilliput, a great festival was taking place and everyone was happy with the food, music and performances, but the population is surprised by an alert signal, warning that an enemy was near. Gulliver asks everyone to be calm and that he would solve the problem one more time. Edward arrives on the scene and inside a small robot declares that he wishes to challenge the giant creature to a fight, and the boy accepts without showing any concern. After this, Edward puts the newest invention into combat mode. The little robot now becomes a fighting machine with a height even greater than Gulliver's. The writer tries to push him, but cannot move the huge robot an inch. Edward controls his machine and in doing so, suspends his opponent by holding him by his underwear, humiliating Gulliver in front of everyone. Still, the population believes in the giant's strength and begins to encourage him. Gulliver reveals to everyone that the stories he has told about his life are false, being only bizarre inventions in his head. The giant finally declares that he has lost the battle, and the people of Lilliput begin to be ruled by the hands of the enemy. Gulliver is tied up in a kind of boat and sent to an isolated island where nobody dares to go. People do not know what kind of thing is in that place and so it is feared by everyone. The giant arrives on the island and while walking around the area is quickly captured. In Lilliput, Horatio tells Princess Mary that he has been thinking of a way to help his best friend, and to do this, he decides to go alone to rescue him. Upon leaving the kingdom, he realizes that the Blefishans have captured another giant, this time Darcy, the newspaper editor. The woman wonders whether this could be a dream or hallucination, but remembers only that she had been through a terrible storm on the high seas, and with the arrival of a water storm, had her boat completely engulfed by the storm. On the mysterious island, Gulliver is held captive by a giant girl who lived alone on the island. She turns him into her own doll, puts him into a toy house, plays various games with him over time, and finally says she will eliminate him if he tries to escape. Horatio, after arriving on the isolated island, manages to get into the colossal girl's house and talks to his friend. The man says that everyone in Lilliput needs his help and even if the stories told are inventions. The giant is still strong and brave for having defended the whole kingdom when they needed it most. Horatio also warns that a new giant has arrived on the island and her name is Darcy. Gulliver, upon hearing this, decides to help the kingdom and save the woman he is in love with. As he takes a closer look at where he was, the giant realizes that other humans have been on that island before him, but did not survive. The giant manages to catch this pilot's parachute and flees the scene with his friend. In prison, Gulliver meets Darcy and tries to explain about the plagiarism he committed and even apologizes for it. The publisher on the other hand ends up discovering that his coworker has always been in love with her, but in addition, the giant also frees the king and asks to be the royal guardian once again. Theodore accepts and gives the boy another vote of confidence. The next day, a new battle was about to take place, the giant of Lilliput against the robot of the Blefishans. Gulliver says that if he wins the battle, there will be no more war and no more conflict between the two peoples. Edward on the other hand says that if he wins the fight, he will destroy all of Lilliput and he will become the new king. The fight begins, a clash between colossal forces is waged. The machine had advantages from the start, but Edward eventually added new abilities to his robot. The former army general has equipped his robot with an electric generator capable of releasing powerful discharges against any adversary. At this moment, Gulliver is hit by a strong electric shock and ends up immobilized on the ground. Horatio tries to help his friend and with his horse rides to the battlefield. The former prisoner breaks into the machine's facilities and ends up having a confrontation with Edward. Meanwhile, Gulliver was suffering from several attacks, but with his friend's strategy, a breach was created. Horatio manages to destroy the electrical generator, putting an end to the disproportionate advantage that Edward possessed. Gulliver wastes no time and realizing the opportunity to attack, he manages to cause damage at the robot and then strikes it several times with a steel statue. With one powerful blow he finishes the fight, incapacitating the machine from continuing to fight. Everyone in Lilliput celebrates the long-awaited victory. Horatio finally gets King Theodore's permission and Princess Mary's love. Now the two can live together as they always wanted. However, the moment of joy and celebration is ruined by Edward, who appears in the crowd and tries to capture the princess once again, but his plan is unsuccessful, as she knocks him out herself with a strong blow to her face. Gulliver celebrates with his beloved and afterwards explains to the King of Blefishans and King of Lilliput that wars and conflicts lead to nothing, only loss and suffering. The representatives of each kingdom give up and agree to put an end to this conflict that has spanned generations. Now the two nations are united and form one great community. Gulliver takes advantage of the moment and tries to make amends with his beloved, apologizing for the lies he has told and for all the awkward situation they have been through. At the end of the day, The famous giant sails back to his home together with Darcy. They meet the water trumpet that led them to that mysterious place, and return to their everyday lives in New York. Now Gulliver has aroused immense admiration for his work. He goes on his journey as a traveling writer alongside his beloved, the two of them adventuring with amazing expeditions made all over the world. So what did you think of this movie? Leave it in the comments below. And if you liked the video, please like and subscribe for more movie recaps. See you